What's up, gang? Thanks for listening to the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. My guest today is someone whose work on China I've tracked for years. No matter where I've been in my political journey, I've always found her analysis really useful. She's a senior expert in the China program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She's held a number of positions in the Washington scene, if you will, including at the faculty at SAIS Johns Hopkins for a long time, and she was director of their Foreign Policy Institute. And she's co-authored a new piece with Alex Stephenson at USIP called Xi Jinping Ramps Up Campaign for a Post-Pax Americana Security Order. My guest is none other than Dr. Carla Freeman. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
So I guess you could say I'm a China watcher. It's not my main thing. And I pay more attention to policy trends than to party rhetoric. Partly, I mean, I'm not fluent in Mandarin, so rhetoric is not my comparative advantage anyway. But also, a lot of what gets said cannot be taken at face value, or it depends who the audience is. There's a lot of double speak, especially on security issues. And I mention all of that up front because when Xi Jinping announced this thing called the Global Security Initiative, I wasn't sure what to make of it. You know, instinctively, I was kind of dismissive about it. But then I read the thing that you wrote with Alex, and I thought it was really helpful and worth unpacking on the show here. So maybe 50,000-foot view. What is the Global Security Initiative? When was it announced? That sort of stuff.
Well, I think it is amorphous enough that it can be whatever you want it to be, but I think it does have a purpose. And as Alex and I wrote, the Xi Jinping and his merry band of diplomats are on a global campaign to promote this idea. And what I see it doing is trying to normalize China's role on the global stage as a deliverer of global security, and also to start to infuse the way that countries think about and talk about security with Chinese concepts that are aligned with the way that China likes to think about security. So, in a nutshell, that's what I see it as. It's analogous in a way to the Belt and Road Initiative in the way
Mhm.
that it's been rolled out. It's a broad framework that now can be used to do a lot of different things. So, we've seen it already applied to some of China's diplomatic initiatives and efforts, like the new Iran-Saudi rapprochement, and we've also seen it attached to remarks by China's Minister of Defense at the misspoke, at the Shangri-La Forum.
Yeah, I mean, security, I suppose, is capacious, but there's so much wide rangingness that it's kind of hard to pin down. Um, you when did it come out? Was it last year?
Yeah, it was actually Xi Jinping rolled out the concept at the Boao Forum in 2022. So that's April 2022. And since then, it took a while, but the Chinese then, I think it was in November, came out with a concept paper on the Global Security Initiative. I may have the date a little bit wrong, but anyway, later in the year, came out with a concept paper that laid out some of the principles, but still put very little meat on the bones of the initiative.
And the Boao Forum too. It's a big, regional multilateral confab that kind of has China at the center, not incidentally. Um, okay. The announcement of GSI, it was linked to these 6 commitments. What's the 6 commitments? And then related to that is the larger question of how does the Chinese Communist Party think about security?
Yeah, really important, and something we probably should all spend our Friday afternoon studying.
Yeah.
The 6 commitments are, some of them resonate with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, a concept that's been very important in Chinese diplomacy for a long time, particularly third commitment, stay committed to respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. But in summary, the first is this notion of committing to the idea of a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. Sorry, the second commitment, I haven't studied hard enough yet, is respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. The third is be committed to abiding by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Stay committed to taking the legitimate security concerns of all countries seriously. And in Xi Jinping's original formulation, that actually was uh, a practice. He referenced indivisible security. So this is a
Mhm.
sort of a redefinition of that concept. And then stay committed to peacefully resolving differences and disputes between countries through dialogue and consultation. And then being committed to maintaining security in both traditional and non-traditional security domains. And Chinese diplomats reading out these six commitments will say that these are linked or interlinking and mutually reinforcing concepts and are an organic whole of dialectical unity.
What the fuck? Yeah, like those things don't actually sound bad to me at all. Like that's almost like an ideal of what America should aspire to in my mind. But there's a lot of ways in which that does not resemble Chinese behavior. Um, you mentioned indivisible security. What does that mean in the China context?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a concept that Chinese themselves can trace to Mao and to the Korean War, but I think the West
Mm,
associates it with the Helsinki Accord, so the mid '70s agreement, and it's just the idea that all countries should think about the security of other countries in their own region indivisibly. So the security of your security has implications for your neighbor's security, basically. So but the thing about that concept, and it's a good concept, and it was helpful to bridging the East-West divide during the Cold War. What has tainted it really was the invocation of that concept by Vladimir Putin as a justification for his attack on Ukraine. So I think that explains why, and China has been quite defensive about saying that Xi Jinping's use of the term indivisible security in his in laying out the concept, in sort of launching the global security initiative, was not an endorsement of Russian aggression. I mean, he not put it that way, but defensive about that. But in fact, the timing their timing of and the use of that term, I just don't think that China is particularly insensitive to the use of concepts, and so I think anyway, whatever it was intended, it certainly seemed to s- align with uh, China's position on Ukraine, quick, neutrality on Ukraine.
on neutral neutrality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was gonna ask that, like, so so presumably Putin invokes this concept. China wasn't writing those talking points. I mean, they're trying to distance themselves from using this to justify the invasion of Ukraine. Isn't I'm trying to make sense. I'm gonna ask you about the Russia China thing later, but like
Mhm.
from the Western perspective, there's obviously a parallel between like how we see Russia invading Ukraine and how we worry about China, pulling that kind of thing on Taiwan. D- is have they have, has China or Xi Jinping talked about indivisible security in relation to Taiwan specifically?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I don't think that it applies to, in China's view, what would be domestic security. So you wouldn't
Mm,
use this concept to talk about Taiwan. Maybe other concepts that Xi Jinping has promoted, including holistic security or common security, which
mhm,
really have more to do with recognizing that and this idea of comprehensive security, that security has many facets, and that's the reference to traditional and non-traditional security, but also in the concept of holistic security, linking domestic and international security. So, and that's a really important concept for China, one that it has also tried to see reinforced through some of its Sinocentric, some of the more Sinocentric multilaterals like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah. I suppose in that sense, like where you invoke this kind of concept about indivisible security as a way of cracking down on Uyghurs or something, like that could end up being problematic. Or I could see like, American policymakers having a huge problem with that. That makes sense. But on conceptually, it sounds almost like it's just urging us to take a kind of relational view or an
Yeah.
ecological view. It's just that you can operationalize it in ways that are pretty gnarly.
I think you put that in a way that the Chinese would appreciate actually, because they have talked a lot about relational diplomacy, relational international relations, and it really
Mhm,
does come down to this principle of, it's your country, you can do what you want in it, and you shouldn't tell countries what kind of political system they have. So you can have a good relationship, but it is sort of a relationship of differences. But then when you think about, you sort of play the logic of both indivisible but even more maybe common or comprehensive or holistic security out
mhm,
there, then you're talking about being sensitive to the hopes and dreams and internal security needs of your neighbor. And then it gets a little stickier, because how then you have to start to harmonize your security systems, perhaps in order to make the principle of holistic security or comprehensive security function. So it's really interesting. I think you're starting to see China trying to operationalize and institutionalize this in some spaces. I'd say Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a particularly good spot to watch.
mhm.
But it is a very different. It's an effort to do something other than alliances, which are fundamentally military in nature. U.S. has partnerships. We have partners and allies, but our allies, those are military. That rests on this idea of collective security. So these are really concepts that are designed to challenge the alliance structure, if you will.
See, that's the like I kind of I don't know if you have thoughts about this, but
Mm,
it almost strikes me that like we could work our policy designs entirely almost within the rhetoric that they're using. Like, is that not a rhetoric that we can graft or adapt to or localize? And then it's like there's a common terrain, and then we can clarify differences within that. What seems to be happening in reality is like we have our rhetoric that justifies our concepts, which sort of makes sense of all the choices that we make, and then they have the choices that they make, and then now they're building their own, infrastructure of rhetoric or whatever. And that's then never the two shall meet. But
mm.
it's like really the rhetorical plane here should be like, I don't know, common, right?
Yeah,
Relation.
I don't think you're wrong there, in that a lot of these concepts are embedded in the UN Charter, so they do sound
Yeah.
familiar to all of us. But I think the difference it lies in the operationalization and the tolerance that we might have for the amount of free space that we allow people, and the amount of risk we allow in our society versus what another system might tolerate. And so then, then if you are thinking about indivisible security, if your neighboring country is not meeting the standards of internal security that you feel is needed for you to feel secure, what does that do? I mean, it's not these are not dilemmas that are unique to this concept. I mean, they are certainly challenges that we've faced. The United States has faced as
Yeah.
well. Maybe not as close to our borders, although we have some issues with security across our borders, but with countries farther afield. Uh, I think it's a provocative concept, one that we should, or this whole framework is a provocative framework, and one that we should really think about. And it has considerable appeal because it resonates, especially with a lot of post-colonial states that are
Mhm.
very concerned about preserving and strengthening their sovereignty.
Yeah, 100%. Um, it is your sense that, like, this global security initiative, is it just narrative that rationalizes some existing policies, or since it's been announced, we can actually see that there's some stuff in evidence, like GSI in action?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's still early days, but I do think the concept itself has been cooking for a while.
Mhm.
You can see it in Xi Jinping's new Asian security concept of 2014, and even in some of the language around China's new National Security Commission. If you're a China wonk, you can rush over and look at that, or the some of the language in the 20th Party Congress more recently. But so that that reflects years of development. But so that conceptually, these are themes that have been around for a little while. But I think it's being used to essentially campaign for China's role on the global stage, and so it's an umbrella for a lot of different initiatives, just like the BRI.
Mhm.
But I think I think it could also become on the operational side, a sort of framework for China exporting some of its uh, policing functions, its surveillance systems, and those kinds of things. So
Mm.
come on board, and we can give you a deal on, our fantastic security camera system. Look, I mean, the United States. I just read an article that said the United States is the global policing superpower. So this is not a unique thing for an international power with high stakes across its borders.
Mhm.
But there are features of Chinese society that we've seen evolving, and particularly during COVID, that are, that I think would are a bit of an anathema to the I'll just say it, the liberal ideal of what it's like to a society that allows people to actualize, to realize their best selves.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fear mongering or
Mhm,
like threat hyping about this stuff, but it's also at the same time you certainly don't want other countries emulating China's regime. Like you don't want an illiberal form of authoritarian capitalism to just like proliferate. Um, but it's also not inevitable that that's what China's doing, or that that's what I don't know.
yeah,
But I can
yeah.
see how this concept would end up sort of being a framework for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a developing country, and you live in a highly insecure environment, you are concerned about providing your population's basic security needs. And so
Yeah.
this certainly has had, I talked about before, I talked about concern about sovereignty, but there also, for developing countries, there are more, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, more basic security concerns. And so I think that they know China's development story resonates with them, and they say, hey, China, you get it.
Mhm.
And this is where uh, we often, the United States in its own rhetoric often misses the boat. And I mean, it's not that we're not an important, still maybe the number one international aid donor, where we are, I believe, still, but we miss the boat in terms of our understanding, I think, of what how some of these societies conceive of security, and this concept may resonate with that more closely.
Yeah. I mean, the global south is like the majority of the world by
Mhm,
population. It's easy to overgeneralize, but like they're largely dissatisfied with American hegemony or
mhm,
like whatever this, the neoliberal global order of the past 50 years.
mhm,
And yet, I don't see a ton of support for, a China quote unquote like leadership role alternative to the US. The global trend is not really choosing China over the US. It's
mhm,
kind of non-aligning or
mhm,
hedging.
mhm.
You've got the Havana Declaration for like a new NIEO. It's all just kind of like we don't choose, we sidestep great power rivalry and try to pick option number 3 or whatever. Who in the developing world has actually, vocalized support for GSI?
Well, the Chinese say there are 80 countries that have expressed
80?
support. Yeah. Oh, that might be more now. That was a little while ago, but
Mm,
actually, the I think it's called the State of Southeast Asia survey that came out earlier this year did ask a question specifically about GSI, and although I think the over the majority, I may have this wrong, but I think the majority of people surveyed across the region supported were sort of they weren't they were favorably inclined to GSI. One analysis I saw pointed out that maritime countries were not people in maritime countries in Southeast Asia were not so supportive, but Cambodia, Laos, and we're more supportive. I think
mm,
surprise was maybe not a surprise. The people in Myanmar were not that supportive. People in Thailand were not that supportive, but other and Vietnam obviously because of its maritime concerns. But Myanmar and Laos, though they were pretty supportive. It was so and it was struck me in I did a little piece on Lula's edit.
Lula da Silva, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so De Silva's visit to the United States, and then also his meeting with on the global security initiative, that part of his meeting, and he dealt on China's global initiatives because the global security initiative is only one part of a three-part stool that China's promoting of global initiatives. So it was really I think he supported the global development initiative,
Mhm.
which focuses heavily on the sustainable development goals, and I think also possibly may have mentioned the global civilization initiative, but the global security initiative was not part of his his supportive rhetoric where China was concerned.
Yeah, my
Mm,
sense I mean, Brazil is kind of like the
mhm,
vanguard
mhm,
of the whole non-aligned thing right
mhm.
now, and
Yeah.
there my sense has been that, like, they wanna be friendly with
Mhm,
China and certainly extract what they
mhm,
can for themselves,
mhm,
but, like, nobody's naive very few people are naive or countries are naive about, like, the sort of darker potential of choosing China, like, it's more of that what do you call it, like, friend to all, enemy to none or something like that?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think countries are getting in line and saying, "Okay, I'll pick this block. I want
Yeah.
to align with China." I think you're right. I think they might, though, say, I'm sure and indeed this is true among some of the countries that have expressed an interest in GSI are U.S. partners. So it's not. It's this is a anything that improves our security sounds great. And
Yeah.
also China will take some more investment, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, also, like, it's hard to deny the appeal of the rhetoric because it's easy to read that rhetoric as being kind of positive sum, absolute gains,
Win-win.
win-win to take an old phrase.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah. Do you think GSI John Eikenberry, I don't agree with him about a lot of things, but he for a long time characterized the Asian sort larger order as being a dual hierarchical, which is to say for like the greater part of 20-25 years, he would point to data that would suggest China is something like an economic hegemon in Asia. It's easy to overstate that. But America is very obviously the security provider of choice in most of Asia. And so you have this uneasy arrangement for a lot of the 21st century where, China is just central to economic life, whether you want to call that hegemony or whatever, it's just part of reality. And America is central to the security of the region, no matter what you think of that. And so, like, he was describing like a functionally differentiated order, which was kind of new in history, where it's like, okay, there's more than one hegemon here, but they're sort of looming over different domains of life. And it's not these great powers that are sort of making that are like dictating that. It's that is the sort of byproduct of smaller states kind of making their peace with China economically and then making their peace with American military presence or whatever. And the result is this pattern that maybe we can call order since it had been fairly stable. But I mean, like, it seems to me that the US is dissatisfied with this and is trying to leverage its own security position for economic changes because those economic changes affect security. But it also the GSI almost looks like China's doing the same thing, but opposite. Like, if its comparative advantage is the economic and it's trying to leverage that to make security to grow that footprint or whatever. And so it's kinda like both great powers are dissatisfied with this dual hierarchy. Does any of that track with you?
To some extent, I mean, a dual hierarchy of the United States is still a major economic player,
Yeah,
including in China's periphery. And so I think, I think China's a heavyweight in the region, and certainly its dominant role has been that of an economic player to some extent. But underneath the surface, of course, there were longstanding security concerns, and many Southeast Asian countries already felt intimidated and concerned about China as a security actor. So I think
mhm,
it's a more complex picture. It's not just the U.S. Providing, security, global public goods in the region, and China as the major deliverer of trade and investment. It's not was never
there's
that.
more going
It's
on
certainly
than that,
not
yeah,
much going on, and part of the reason the U.S. has sustained its security role in the region is that it is also an important economic player, but it's also countries the agency that you referenced on the part of the smaller countries in the region has also uh, kept the U.S. And helped the U.S. grow its security role in the region as they have sought to balance against China, and that is, the U.S. talked about demand signals from countries in the region, and that's actually not artificial. There have been interests. Take Vietnam for example, a
mhm,
country that you'd think in many ways would be have worked out its relationship with China in along multiple dimensions, but
mhm.
instead, because of the sovereignty dispute between the two countries in particular, but probably other factors, historical factors as well, has fostered this important security relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, there may be more than 2, but the 2 big areas where the
Mm,
developing world kind of wants great power collaboration is on, like, climate policy, right? Generating
mhm,
resources for climate adaptation, and then, like, debt restructuring and debt relief.
mhm,
I don't know if you would add any to that, but, like,
mhm,
the US has not made much effort to work with China on those
mhm,
issues,
mhm.
but the same can also be said of China, like,
That's right.
from China's point of view, why not try to work out that stuff with the US? Like, what is the obstacle from China's
Mhm.
side?
Well, I think China's pretty upset with the United States, and I think the key reason is Taiwan and our policy on Taiwan, which China sees as having moved away considerably from the one China
Status
policy that we
quo,
had,
yeah.
yeah, that status quo. And so there are that is really a major. They China describes that Taiwan as the core of its core interests, and I think that
Mhm.
is driving its policy and constraining its cooperation with the United States. And you'll still hear China talk about cooperating with the United States, but that's conditional on the Taiwan issue and changes to the direction of policy that the United States has taken on Taiwan. But I think, and also on more particular issues, areas where China feels that the U.S. has, I will use the term, humiliated it, including the sanctions against Minister of Defense Lee, those sorts of things. And
Mhm.
so there are some conditions that China would like to see the United States take steps to improve on certain aspects of its policy, change certain aspects of its policy before it will cooperate on these issues. So it's not good for the world.
Yeah, I mean, so the overall quality or the valence of the relationship matters. It inhibits the ability to actually get something done in certain areas, yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Which
the
is
hope.
intuitive, you would think, I guess, but
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I was just going to say, you would think that, in theory, that you could improve the quality of the relationship by cooperating on these global issues, which are where both countries have enormous stakes too themselves.
Mhm.
It's not just smaller countries, but both the United States and China have enormous stakes in mitigating climate change, for example, or managing outer space policy or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the paradox, like, the I'm sympathetic to arguments like, "Look, China and the US just need to cooperate," and it's like, "Dude, I get it, I agree. What's the how?" Like, the objects of cooperation are you're inhibited from doing those things because the valence of the relationship is, like, horrific, because you're in a rivalry or whatever. It's like
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Also, we have a bit of a bump. The U.S. has a bit of a bumpy reputation on some of these global issues. So there's that too.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, we need more self-reflection in general. Um, uh, this goes a little beyond GSI, but maybe it's connected actually. The China-Russia thing, like, what do you make of them moving closer? How meaningful is it? How deep is it? How shallow is it? How fleeting is it? Just what are your thoughts about China-Russia?
Yeah, they are just thoughts. There are many people out there who have a lot better knowledge and who understand Russia better than I do. But I think I agree with the view that China and Russia fundamentally mistrust each other. That they carry a lot of that relationship has a lot of baggage,
Mhm.
but they are capable of alliances and working closely together. And I think they share a mutual fear or a mutual concern about the United States, and that is pulling them together closely. And
Mhm.
I think that this it could be quite durable if the security and actually have some teeth, even if the security situation in globally deteriorates further. And part of that also, if tensions ratchet up any more than they have in the Taiwan Strait, that sort of thing. We're really not going to see any give in the China-Russia relationship unless Russia does something like, pretty extreme. Uh, then you might see it. And here, what comes to mind is really extreme, like tactical nuclear weapons. Then you might see China
Mm.
shift its perspective. But right now, I've heard Chinese say the US wants to weaken Russia so that they can come after us. And so that's a
Mm.
pretty powerful view. And then
Yeah.
there's the whole Putin and Xi thing. But I really do think that they share a sense of history and share a sense of, of being under attack by the U.S. and its allies, its alliances.
Yeah, that's a problem. Can you talk a little bit about China's the Made in China 2025?
Mm,
Like, when this at the time, I remember some pundits, because it was announced in 2015, I think. I remember some pundits being like, "This is a threat to US interests because it's a threat. China's threatening globalization," was like sort of the narrative. And like that was not super widespread, but I remember that. And I mean, that argument really doesn't hold water now because like we are making all the Bidenomics is anti-globalization. So like this does this made in China 2025, what is it, I guess, as an introduction, but like what do you think of it in light of 2023 compared to when it first got announced?
Well, I think it was it seems so long ago now. I think it as a sort of a industrial policy on steroids, where China
Mhm.
was seeking to really become a global leader across, pretty much all all industrial domains, and particularly high tech domains, which challenged U.S. leadership in
Semiconductors.
those. So yes, and things like that. And doing that with by pumping its own industries full of lots of gas, and from state coffers, or that doesn't really work, that, but anyway, from the, from the state gas tanks, and also including things like forced technology transfer and that kind of thing. So it just hit that nerve in the United States of, this is unfair,
Mhm.
and China is using its economic leverage uh, to to basically muscle its way ahead. And also that was accompanied by the military civil fusion policy, because so
Mhm.
many of these technologies are dual use, which allowed that really it was a shift toward boosting China's state sector, and a counter trend in some ways to the pattern of encouraging a private sector to thrive that we had grown used to in China. But it it also just because so many of these technologies are dual use, I think it really triggered a nerve, and the concern was that China was going to become this sort of pumped up techno military power. And in some ways, it is possible to look at a lot of China's sectors and draw that conclusion. Of course, as we've taken steps to hamper the growth of China, some of China's high tech industries, we've discovered China's got many weaknesses,
Mhm.
and actually is far more dependent on U.S. technology, European technology, other advanced economies technology, than that initial sort of visceral reaction suggested.
Yeah, I get the ambition on China's part, or particularly to like mitigate vulnerabilities or accrue power, and I get that like the US is kind of mirror imaging that now in a way, but like there remains a lot of mutual dependence in like very concrete ways with manufacturing chains and the critical mineral supplies and stuff. Even separate from them holding our treasury bonds, there's
Yes.
just so much mutual dependence, but these initiatives are like contra that or like fly in the face of that, yeah.
Yeah, those are personally, I understand the problems with globalization, and but I really do think a lot of the problems that globalization generates just require good distributive policies, or some sort of policy, domestic policies that can be sensitive to that. Of course, our global trading system and the institutions that were set up were not designed for a enormous uh, country that basically did practices state capitalism. And so, it didn't, there was an incompatibility that that needed to be addressed.
Mhm.
And here it's a shame that we didn't get past TPP, which would have possibly helped pull the Asia along, the Pacific, Asia Pacific along in a different direction, and maybe China with it. But that's a that's we'd have to write a different sort of counterfactual
Counterfactual, yeah.
to go there.
Yeah, I'm mindful of time, especially because
Mhm,
it's late on
mhm,
your end.
yeah.
One final question about what Xi Jinping wants in a way, like, China rolls out these branded initiatives from time to time, like Made in China
Mhm,
2025,
mhm,
like BRI, right?
mhm,
Like GSI. And in Washington, I think these branded things, they're often interpreted as evidence that China that's proof of, like, Chinese wanting domination or hegemony or whatever, like, that's proof that they're trying to replace us as global hegemon.
mhm,
But not only does that require making a lot of, like, unscrutinized assumptions to come to that conclusion, but also, like, there's no question that even if you believe Chinese hegemony is the goal of the CCP,
mhm,
which is debatable, China is clearly not trying to destroy all the elements of the existing international order. So, like, as the parting question, like, what parts of the international system is China basically fine with? And then, like, what parts are more
mhm.
they demand change of more?
Yeah, I mean, China likes the UN system. It
Mhm,
really does. It likes the structure of the UN system, and it likes a lot of the multilateral institutions that exist, but it doesn't like it doesn't like systems where the United States is the heavy, and so it has created it has tried to leave some of these systems in place. I mean, not tamper with these systems too much, but it has started to create complementary, supplementary systems or groupings or mechanisms that can serve as again complements to the existing system, particularly the UN system, but also risk becoming off ramps from some of these multilateral institutions. So, and also, China is has a unique, quite unique way of doing things, and so when it becomes part of a mainstream institution, even if it is willing to be relatively socialized to that system, it has its own vocabulary, and and often these concepts don't translate well uh, to those organizations, and so there is an element of tension within those organizations, and sometimes those concepts really are different. And so China might like the organization, but not like some of the concepts that are foundational to to that organization. But
mm,
it's a complicated picture, and I'm glad that you introduced the topic the way that you did, because there are absolutely organizations, internet multilateral organizations that China is fine with, and is fully supportive of. But it also sees gaps where its voice can't be heard,
mhm,
and it shares that view with other emerging countries in particular. So we've seen the development of everything from the new development bank to the SEO to a whole array of different organizations like the Lancang Mekong Cooperation, those sorts of things.
mhm,
Those express China's frustration with the existing system that it hasn't been able to use to advance its own uh, interests, but also its own perspective of what regional or international goals should be.
yeah, that's well put. Um, alright, well, Carla Freeman, this was awesome. Thanks for doing this. Very efficient too. Really important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk to you. And I think that this is an evolving subject. So glad you drew attention to it, and you asked wonderful questions that made me think new thoughts. So thank you.
Awesome, yeah, thanks. Alright, we'll be in touch. Thank
Great.
you. Alright,
Take care. Bye bye.
bye.